hope for the Anglicare Mental Health Project is that we will actually be able to make a difference in the lives of people. When we as a society are frightened by something and we shrink away, we are diminished as persons. Some people are frightened of people with a mental illness. Some are not sure how to respond or how to talk with someone. Some simply avoid them. When this happens, people fail to grow, and individually and collectively, we are the poorer for doing so. We are inviting people to establish meaningful relationships and not to avoid each other. We are inviting people to take considerable risks. We are inviting people to diversify their group of friends and associates, and hence enrich their life and faith experience. It is my hope that this project will help our society move part of the way toward the ideal, in which people recognise their need for each other, and in which the fact that a person has suffered mental illness has no bearing on their ability to gain acceptance and the opportunity to make and maintain mutually enriching relationships.
Good morning, everyone. That was the voice of Owen Strong, an Anglican, now retired Anglican minister, who in 1994, from his personal connections with people experiencing mental health challenges and living in large institutional facilities, he imagined what could be if more of us could develop meaningful relationships with people who had mental health challenges, and these relationships being underpinned by mutual respect and acceptance. So from this dream, the vision that what could be, there was conceived an action research project, the Anglicare Mental Health Project, as it was called then. Workshops were carried out, interviews and seminars were held around southeast Queensland. It sought to understand how the process of inclusion or exclusion works for people who have encountered mental health difficulties. From this project, the idea of an organisation that is now called A Place to Belong was born. The vision now is to continue practising, modelling and providing strategic influence in community inclusion in the mental health and disability sectors. Joe mentioned that we are small. We're very small. We support 5 people in recovery-based intensive support programs. There's 2 people who have recently received Community Living Initiative funding. We have a very small inclusion team, and we also run a reading and writing program that seeks to assist people who can't access even mainstream disability services to reach their literacy goals. So we're very small. We have no full-time workers, we all work part-time, and we're a fairly diverse group of people. Yesterday, we heard over and over again of the importance of dreaming and visioning of what is possible. So here are a few of the guiding principles that we really aim to work by.
Our dream is to facilitate inclusive, connected communities.
Our dream is that people who live with mental health challenges will be able to find places of welcome, respect and inclusion.
Our dream is to resource and inspire people in the community who wish to offer the vital friendship and threads of contact in which others yearn.
Our dream is to search for and locate community-minded people who are willing to offer friendship to others who are excluded and who are struggling to find their place.
Now, to get us to think about our home and communities, can I ask you to turn to the person next to you and just share for a couple of minutes your ideas. Where in your home is your favourite spot, and where in your community do you feel welcomed? You can just share for a couple of minutes and we'll come back together. It's beautiful to see that energy in the room. We ask you to think about belonging for yourself because it helps you think about belonging for others. In my case, my favourite spot in my home is my front veranda, because it overlooks an old church across the road where my kids play with other kids in the neighbourhood, and it overlooks my kids' primary school as well, which is a place where I feel very welcomed and included. A large part of my sense of belonging is from the relationships I have with other people in my life, and one of the people in my life is Essie, and I wanted to share with you today Essie's journey. I'd like to share with you about the work that Essie and I have done together, and share with you some of the insights she's shared with me in her courtyard, which is her favourite place in her home. Essie has very kindly given me permission to share her story and what her journey has been like to be able to live in her own home. Now, she doesn't want me to show you photos of her, and in fact she doesn't even want me to show you photos of her courtyard because she doesn't think it looks fancy enough. But she has allowed me to talk about all the things that I'm about to talk about. I can't show you a photo of her, but I can describe her to you. Essie is a very sociable person. She likes to share with people her love of 80s music, her love of fashion, and anything French. She shares freely with others. She's generous of spirit, she's warm-hearted, she's very strong, she has a beautiful sense of, she's very fun-loving, and she's a bit quirky as well. Now, to give you a bit of background, I've been working with Essie since November 2011, so for 21 months now. And we've had the privilege of spending a lot of time together, doing ordinary things, as well as going through the steps of moving Essie into her own accommodation, into her own flat. And when we talk, it is really from a very privileged place of being able to spend a lot of time together and to get to know each other really well. And I recognise that not all people have that opportunity to work with people in that way. So my role is team leader of Essie's team. Now, when I met Essie, she was living at the Community Care Unit, which I might refer to as CCU accidentally, but I will try not to use that acronym. It's a complex of 20 units in one block, and it is staffed with an office and a staff of a psychiatric treating team. That's how they would call themselves a clinical team. Now, Essie had been living there for a few months when I met her, but prior to that she'd been living for 16 years in a long-stay psychiatric hospital. Now, Essie is just a couple of years younger than me, by the way. Now, after working with Essie for a little while, I grew to understand that she'd grown up in the child protection system, or welfare, as Essie calls it. So I realised very early on that Essie had lived most of her life in a system of one form or another. And she would have had countless workers in her life before me. Yet she shared with me freely. She was really thoughtful towards me, and I couldn't help but admire her warmth given her life experiences. So, getting back to our conversations in her courtyard. In preparation for this presentation, I asked Essie about the way we worked with her and how she found it. She said to me, "My support workers see me as a person," and quickly followed that with, "You didn't come in and say you're sick. You didn't have that attitude." I think this is a really insightful statement. It's very simple, but it's so crucial to the success of our work together. The importance of seeing the person, the whole person, their personality and their essence. And part of the photos up there are of some of the things Essie loves. She loves Duran Duran. We'll share that with you very freely. And loves Vogue, Coco Chanel, anything glamorous like that. Now, Essie was born with cerebral palsy, so she has some limitations with her mobility, and she's also an Aboriginal woman. So as you can probably imagine, Essie has been seen through a number of labels in her life and in a number of systems, which has been really disempowering for her. Essie has a lot of concerns about being monitored by professionals and treated in a childlike way in her life. So it's been crucial to respect her and encourage her for her to be in the driver's seat in her life, acknowledging that it is her life and it is her journey. So, some of the ways we do that. The way that A Place to Belong works, and part of seeing the person, is the way we formed a team around Essie. Essie has a team of 9 workers, including myself, and we're called Essie's team. When we employ someone to work with Essie, we interview them first to see if their values are aligned with A Place to Belong, and then we introduce that potential worker to Essie, and she decides if she'd like them on her team. We have that new worker work alongside Essie and an established worker who's already in Essie's team. And either Essie or the worker are able to decide if they have a good rapport or not, and get a feel for if they'd like to continue to work together. It's Essie's team, and she decides who she wants to work with. At any time, she's able to decide if she no longer wants to work alongside a worker. I believe this is a really empowering experience for Essie, who's not previously had any input into the workers who work with her. Now, this process is about seeing the person you work with, listening to their needs, respecting their perspectives and their right to self-determination. It is not mental health specific, it is the foundations of building a working relationship with someone. So other examples of the way we work include Essie's team meetings, where Essie is always present. We don't make decisions without her. And we meet with other professionals with Essie, again, never without her. So this way of working, where we see the person and appreciate the essence of who Essie is as a person, also helps Essie feel that she belongs. So back in her courtyard, when I asked Essie about what helps her belong, she told me feeling appreciated and accepted for who I am. Essie talks about feeling acceptance through friendship. Friendship with support workers, community allies and neighbours. At A Place to Belong, we work from a framework that values strengths and acknowledges our shared vulnerability. We view mental health and mental distress as something we all have the capacity for. We value mutuality and we value relationships. So one of Essie's strengths is her sociability and her love of hosting gatherings, and you can see there's quite a few photos up there of some of the guests at her house. At these gatherings, you'll find Essie's friends, her community allies, and her workers and their families. Very similar to June yesterday, showing those beautiful photos of all the gatherings at her place. Now, I understand that in a lot of organisations, a worker attending gatherings out of hours with their child or their partner is seen as unprofessional. But at A Place to Belong, we see this as part of the richness of our work. And workers can choose to give their time freely or not. Either way is okay. So Essie has identified that she has a sense of belonging from the friendship she's developed with community allies. Community allies are people who would like to reach out to isolated people through friendship and believe in fostering an inclusive community. Essie's circle of friends has grown significantly since being introduced to community allies. She is such a warm person that there is real mutuality in these relationships. These friendships with unpaid people reinforce Essie's feelings of being appreciated and accepted. She's also developing friendships with neighbours, and this helps her feel she belongs in her community and in her home. Essie often invites her neighbours for a cup of tea, and this is a way that Essie contributes to her neighbourhood. Her neighbour, Mary, remarked to me that neighbours, previous to Essie moving in, neighbours never met in this way. And she's really enjoyed the contact she's had with the people who live in those units as a result of Essie. So inviting people into her home has been an important key to Essie's sense of well-being and belonging. When I asked Essie, "What does a home mean to you?" she said, "I feel safe here, I have more freedom and more responsibility, and I'm treated as an adult." These are all feelings that she has never experienced in Queensland Health facilities. When Essie lived at the community care unit, she was not supposed to smoke on her veranda because it's a Queensland Health facility. Queensland Health policy overrode any sense of it being the resident's home. And in your home, it is perfectly normal to smoke on your veranda. Most of the residents were smokers, so the policy forced them to congregate out in the front of the units in the heat of the sun. There was no shelter there, so in Brisbane, in the heat of the summer, with the sun belting down on you, in the cold or the rain, they were out there having cigarettes. And I believe this is a really stigmatising policy and made people feel in a patient's role rather than in a resident's role. So living in a Queensland Health facility contributed to Essie's worries about being monitored and treated as a child. So Essie is slightly rebellious by nature. So she used to smoke on her veranda, and in defiance, she rarely used an ashtray and just threw her cigarette butts on the veranda floor. Now, where she lives now, her courtyard is her favourite place because she loves to smoke, and she puts all her butts in the ashtray, and she looks after her place beautifully. And you can see in the photo that it's her very clean kitchen. She loves washing up. She would be the perfect flatmate because she, really enjoys doing those kind of things. And what is really lovely is Essie no longer talks about being monitored, even though she spends much more time with the Place to Belong staff than she did with workers in the community care unit. So the last point I'd like to make in talking about Essie's story is the importance of believing in Essie. A really important aspect of our work is believing in the possibilities of what can be. Believing in the vision that Essie can have a good life in her own home. Believing in Essie's ability to grow. We trust in the process that if we work with Essie in a respectful way, a way that empowers her, if we work with her strengths, if we journey with her through the ups and downs and help to build supports around her, people who share that vision and appreciate who she is, and they can, over time, build enduring friendships, then if we work in this way, seeing the journey as long-term, then we will help to create a better life for Essie. Essie said I can share this example with you of this. So, as Essie had lived her life, either under the control of the child protection system or under the psychiatric system, she has had a lifetime of being monitored and decisions being made about her, often without her. She hasn't had a lot of opportunity to practice some of the life lessons that we all find difficult, such as delayed gratification. That is, you forego instant gratification for longer-term gain. So like many of us, she struggles with diet and exercise and her budget. When Essie moved from being in a long-stay psychiatric hospital for 16 years to the CCU, the community care unit, and started buying her own food, this must have felt like an incredible freedom to be enjoyed. After all, I think it's pretty normal that if you've been restricted for a long time, you're going to go a little bit wild when you get some freedom. And this freedom was so welcome. She wasn't ready to moderate herself or listen to advice about nutrition, and she wanted to protect her right to choose her lifestyle and her right to make a choice of any kind. So as a result, Essie put on a lot of weight, which in turn severely affected her mobility. It also contributed to her developing sleep apnea. And so she was in this cycle of having incredibly low energy from untreated sleep apnea, making it difficult for her to exercise, which made it difficult for her to lose weight. And she started having falls and some difficulties with her continence. So now most people learn through experience, and Essie is no exception. She also holds a lot of fear in relation to being judged and being controlled by others, very understandably. So when Essie makes informed decisions, she needs to experience the problem for herself. She needs to decide in her own time about what to do about it, and she needs to talk about it with people who she trusts. Then she reflects, and she's more able to make an informed choice. Now, this process was starting to happen, and Essie was understanding that she needed to make some different choices when the treating team, without consultation, put an application into the Administrative Tribunal for Essie's decisions to be made by the adult guardian, because they deemed that she was unable to make informed decisions for herself. Now, we shared the treating team's concern about Essie's well-being, but this way of approaching her just reinforced her fear and her distrust. The positive was that it did help to motivate Essie to address the issues that were occurring, but she had started to address these issues prior to this application being put in. We advocated very strongly for Essie that she was able to make informed decisions with support. And what I have learnt about Essie is that she takes a couple of steps forward and she takes a couple of steps back, but she does go forward again, because she needs to experience that for herself, in the same way we all make decisions through our own experience. At times, we feel very concerned about her neglecting her health, but we talk about it with her directly. We share our concerns with her and we don't lose hope. We hold the vision of how she wants her life to be, and we negotiate through relationship-based dialogue. Now, Essie's feeling safe is a key issue in our work. Even with well-established, loving, mutual relationships with workers, Essie can have bad thoughts that her workers have spoken badly about her to other people, or that we plan to cut her hair during the night. We respond to her fears by validating her feelings, listening deeply, responding by bringing people in or having time out where workers have a break from her, and then we come back together and we talk about the situation and share our feelings in a really heartfelt way. Essie said to me, "I feel listened to when there's a misunderstanding." And she said, "You have the guts to resolve conflicts." So in terms of what can be for Essie, I think she'll be able to enjoy a life of connections to people and place through having her own home. With the deepening of these connections, I think she'll have less mental distress. And as her sense of well-being and safety increases, my hope is she will venture out more and experience new things and a fuller life.
So that's a little bit about Essie. And we'll pass on to her your warm applause. I want you to think back to the second question that Nerida asked. Where in your community do you feel welcomed? Because it relates a little bit to the next story about Joan that I'm going to share with you. So for me, where I feel welcomed, it's at a number of cafes and coffee shops around West End and inner city Brisbane. And for those of you that know me, you know I love my coffee. I have been called a coffee Nazi. And it's where I'm known by name and my coffee order. So I feel that just in a small way, I'm welcomed. And I've got to know some coffee shop owners have become very good friends. Another place I feel welcomed and love going is the West End markets early on a Saturday morning. I go to the Apple Man, and I know Harry, who I always chat with. I go to this, I don't know his name, but he sells fantastic garlic. And then there's the woman that I buy yogurt off. So I know these people and I have my routines, and it's a place where I can enjoy so much more than going to the local Coles and meet these people, and it's the regular routine. So these are some of the places in my community that I feel welcome. As we reflect on our work of inclusion at a place to belong, it can be helpful to use a lens of a framework to think about more deeply about the work we do. Yesterday I found it really helpful when John shared that framework with us as a way of going, oh, okay, and so that's sometimes what we try and do in our work, is to reflect and think, is there something we're missing? Are we doing the best job that we can do? Sorry. So this one's all stolen from Neil, and he did say that I could steal them, adapt them. You know, he's a very generous man, our manager. But this one, the loci of belonging, I found helpful to think about someone's sense of belonging around these things, of their identity. Who is the person? The place. Where do they belong? Where are those places that they can feel welcomed? Their interests. What is it that floats their boat? What is it that really motivates them to get up in the morning? And taking into account those three things, how do we work with the person? So again, as Deb said, there are no formulas as such. This isn't a formula, but it does help to have some underpinnings to our work, to think deeply about the people that we work with. So the person that I'm going to introduce you to is Joan. Joan's happy for me to share some of her story with you, and together we took some of the photos that you'll see. Through this presentation, I'm going to also use some of her own words. We helped her develop a story. She really wanted to write her story down. She feels quite sort of disconnected with a lot of her past, and part of this story then went into a funding application for CLI, Community Living Initiative funding. So sometimes I'll be reading some of her words that she's happy for me to share to you. So she says, "My name is Joan, but sometimes I go by the name Jean. I was born in Melbourne," so she was very excited to hear I was coming here. "I was born in Melbourne in 1956 and grew up in Essendon and Sunbury. I've lived in Queensland now for quite some time. I've been working with Joan for just over a year, but she has been known to us at A Place to Belong a lot longer, because she has sort of just wandered into the space that we have and reads the books and writes on the books and brings her stuff and leaves bags everywhere because she doesn't have anywhere safe to put her things. After getting to know Joan better, we now know her to be a gracious, polite and very observant woman with a very dry wit. I was telling her that my daughter studies down here, and she said, "What does she study?" And I said, "Oh, global arts." And she said, "That tells me nothing." She's resourceful and she wants to contribute. She also has an amazing advocate's heart. To more than one staff member, she has gone up and in her sort of quiet way, "Is that Neil paying you enough?" Neil's our manager. So she's always looking out to make sure that people are getting what they deserve in the work that they do. She's unfortunately also known by many other labels in West End and South Brisbane, where she lives, and she faces great challenges to make herself understood. She hears and sees things that other people don't see or hear. And she has a thing that we're learning about, or I'm certainly learning about, a thing called formal thought disorder. And so a bit of understanding around that diagnosis, although we don't concentrate on diagnoses in our work, it has helped us to understand a little bit more about how to communicate with Joan. So Damien, who's done a lot of work with her also, has said to me, "Imagine that the conversations with Joan are like a jigsaw, and you get little bits, and they come together, and slowly but surely you build a picture that is easier to understand rather than a much more linear, backward and forth, regular conversation." So deep listening has meant that we better understand Joan. So that's part of who Joan is, and you'll learn more about her as we go on. So the place, where does Joan belong? Well, she says, "My current residence," she doesn't call it her home, "is a 21-room hostel in Colville Street. All of my meals are provided at the hostel at set times. I share my bedroom with another woman but she and I don't really speak much. She's lived in this bedroom now for 12 years, and that's the size of it. She invited me there the other day for the first time, so I was a little taken aback. In its credit, it's clean and airy. I've been to hostels that are dark and dingy and really just, like a rabbit warren. So it is clean and airy. However, she has no cupboard that is lockable. She has nowhere that she can store her treasured possessions. And she shares very closely with another woman that she says, "I don't hate her, I just don't care for her." Meaning that sense of, don't really have much time. She says she does have some friends at the hostel and I'm interested in their well-being. But in my current accommodation, I don't have my own key, I don't have much control over my personal circumstances or privacy, and I don't always feel safe. I would like to have my own space, a safe space to keep my treasured things and a greater sense of personal security about where I'm living. I'd like to have greater access to the TV, a computer, and I'm not really able to choose the programs on TV. So when she says her meals are at a set time, dinner's at 4:30 in the afternoon because staff go off at 5, so they have dinner at 4:30. So in summer, you imagine in Brisbane, it doesn't get dark till 7:30 and they're grown men and women having dinner at that time. And she's been there for 13 years. So that's part of her place, but Joan is a woman who walks for miles. I think it's a way of her being able to deal with some of the mental distress that she has, and she walks for many miles around West End and South Brisbane. So some of the interests. We were surprised by some things that we learnt about Joan, but one day when she was able to, she found a financial review that was sitting around and she was reading it, and Amanda said, "Oh, you like the financial review?" And she said, "Of course." So Joan has written, "I'm still interested in finance. I like to read publications such as Business Review Weekly, Newsweek and the Financial Review. My other interests include real estate, law and politics. I also like to read newspapers and magazines, even such as New Idea and Woman's Weekly. I have a range of diverse interests which I actively can pursue. My family's heritage is German and I speak some of the language. I'd like to find out more about my family, as much of this information has been lost to me and I feel it's an important part of my history." So pictures there, Joan comes to the office at 69 Thomas Street and she works with Damien on some of her literacy and her writing. She frequents many of the op shops around West End, so that's Lifeline, but there's also Vonnie's, St Vonnie's and St Vinnie's, and she goes and volunteers in those places. And since she was involved as a focus person in the OASD course with Michael Kendrick, she's regularly comes to Crew now and has done some, because I also work at Crew, and she has done some volunteer work for us there. So she has lots of interests and lots of things that she wants to understand and find out about more. So based on this, what are the best ways to work with Joan? I love that photo of Amanda and Joan. Amanda started on student placement with us and really is the person who we can give a lot of credit to for what we know about Joan. She had a 400-hour placement, I think it was, and she spent hundreds of those hours with Joan, sitting, listening, recording some of those jigsaw pieces. So now, because of Amanda, we know that when Joan talks about Martin, that was her husband. When she talks about Elizabeth, that's her daughter who is still living, but she has no contact with. When she talks about Emerald, she used to live in Emerald. So slowly but surely, when she talks about her hearing aid, that's her voices that she hears. So we're starting to sort of decode a lot of what she's talking about. And she would be said to be quite delusional, but when you understand some of the riddles, it's not delusional at all. She's trying to have an understanding of what's going on, and she says to us, "Would you help me put all the Joans together?" And I think, with working with people who've had quite significant mental health issues, that fragmentation of their lives, to just sit with them and help them put part of themselves back together. The other thing, she's a huge Doctor Who fan, and so she talks about going in the TARDIS, and Damien, who runs the reading and writing, he goes, of course she likes the TARDIS, because she can go back to times when things were better. And I go, of course. So I was writing out the sending off the funding application, and I said to Joan, how do you sign off a letter? You know, do you say yours faithfully, yours sincerely? I wanted to have it. And she goes, yours in the TARDIS. So another thing, you know, we talked about the essence. One thing that Amanda said to me, now it might surprise you, I'm a little bit of an extrovert, and I tend to come in bouncing, you know, no matter how little sleep I've had, I'm like this. And one day Amanda said to me, Sue Ellen, you have to be moonlight, not sunlight. It was a revelation, no, seriously, an absolute revelation to us. And now we tell everyone that. You have to be moonlight with Joan, not sunlight. So I have to very actively just bring myself down, lower my voice. How are you, Joan? She's a woman who responds to respect and politeness. So to say, Joan, it's so lovely to see you. Would you like a cup of tea? To sit and have a cup of tea. So we're looking for workers who can do that. And at the moment we have a lovely, where's Rainey from?
Thailand.
Rainey is a student from Thailand, and she just gets the sitting still with Joan thing. And so she's someone, like, she's naturally moonlight. I'm not naturally moonlight, but neither's Neil, so, you know, we just have to calm ourselves down. But, you know, it's a lovely thing. So also Damien, in his role as the RAW coordinator, did you see in that clip the one bit she picked up a pencil and started writing? This was the key that Damien sort of unlocked, that she would often write, and we think she was working in accounting, so often she writes in sort of ledger form, and she writes lots of letters in her form. And then one day Damien said, would you like to use a computer? We had no idea if she could use a computer, and she started typing. And in amongst the stuff that didn't make a lot of sense, there was stuff that was absolutely lucid. And so that's another way that we now communicate with her, is you give her a pen, or as she's talking we write down and we say, is that what you mean? And so we're developing this way of talking with her. So this finding the right people is absolutely fundamental to the way we work. Sometimes we write up a profile of the sort of people that we're looking for, both paid and unpaid. So with Joan, it's just become very clear, and excuse the way, it's like we need people who aren't freaked out by Joan. Bottom line, that are just comfortable with her, because we don't have the time to do all the other stuff of getting that. We just need people who make that connection and like her. And so that's the starting point. Then, beautifully, as Mark said yesterday, is Mark here today? This is just so... Mark said, my aim is to teach Luke's friends how to support him appropriately. And I thought that's what we do with Joan and the people that come into her life. It's the people that make that connection, and then we give them a few tools of how to communicate. That is so important. So the respect and politeness is all very important, and these different strategies of how to work with her, understand her, have really advanced our work. This is not a formula though, so it's so different of working with Trevor or Laurie or Essie. We need different people that will be able to be suited to those roles. I just wanted to tell you about sweet spots. It's been really helpful. So Joan has lots of sweet spots around West End, and some of them are places you might imagine, but others are places that you don't imagine. West End Tax, Stephen there has a file for Joan, and she apparently comes in. These were all things Joan did before we were there. We'll quickly leave you with a few reflections and learnings. Many of the people that we work with have experiences with formal structures such as treatment teams and case managers, or the general community that see them as sick, chronically unwell, psychotic, non-compliant, unmotivated, mental, aggressive, and most of the focus is on their problems, the risks, the concerns, rather than what is possible for them with the right supports and environments. We endeavour to look for the person's essence, their spirit, their potential, and to utilise their interests and passions as a way of supporting them to reach their goals and dreams.
We believe in the person's ability to grow and to develop. And this doesn't mean that we're in denial about the risks or the problems, but we do choose to look holistically at an individual's vulnerabilities and think carefully about what safeguards need to be put in place to increase and sustain the person's well-being.
Finding the right people, as I said, this relates to both paid and unpaid supports. The right match of personality, temperament and interests will give a better chance of developing authentic relationships that are likely to be more sustainable.
We also talk a lot about dilemmas because and our thinking has been deepened by the training with Michael Kendricks around dilemmas and supporting choice. And we work with these tensions every day. Basically, I guess we see dilemmas as something, like in Essie's team, the things that she experiences are common to us all. And so when we negotiate these dilemmas with her, we recognise that we all share tensions between what we want to do in the moment and what we want to do long term. And we do really recognise what it might be like to have support workers around you all the time, discussing your decisions at every turn. And then we discuss these tensions very openly in team meetings. We ask Essie, what do you want to do about this? We use a lot of informal talking as well, and we really resist being in a parental role and trying to control choices. So in ending, it's still early days for Essie and Joan, and this is long-term work for them to realise their dreams of connection and belonging in the community. There are no quick fixes. Meaningful relationships take time and energy, and we as workers need to be very intentional in our support.
And as we were thinking about this yesterday after the day, Nerida looked at me and said, where do we insert the love? Because actually we think that's a lot of what the work is about. Now, I know that actually this is a huge conversation around professionalism, dual relationships, and there's some agencies that forbid their workers to work the way that we do. But I actually think that we as a sector need to have a robust discussion about this, because if relationships are important, as we all have been saying, how can we do it in the way that policies and procedures tell us that we are supposed to relate to these people? How can we help them to be connected if we don't do it in an organic, heartfelt way? So I think that's an area that we really need to think and talk about, and not just with the small agencies, but with larger agencies, and help them to help their workers do what they want to do. That's the thing. People want to connect. They want to build relationships. That's why they do the work they do. So we need that discussion. And just to finish, going back to the words of Owen, it is our hope that this project, What Is Now a Place to Belong, will help our society to move part of the way towards the ideal, in which people recognise their need for each other, and in which the fact that a person has suffered a mental illness has no bearing on their ability to gain acceptance and the opportunity to make and maintain mutually enriching relationships. Thanks.
Thank you.